Okay, so I'm here to present briefly on the current state of Islandora infrastructure and specifically how it relates to Fedora. So I'm Noah Smith. I run a small digital repository agency called Born Digital. We're headquartered here in Western Massachusetts. But if you are old timers in the Islandora or Fedora community, you'll recognize a few Prince Edward Islanders on there as well. So we have three up on Prince Edward Island and the rest here in Massachusetts. I guess I should mention also, I've been on the Islandora Foundation board for most of the last decade, as we've been working primarily in Islandora. But we do all sorts of things. We do software development, so repository development, really, and feature enhancements to Islandora and other similar repositories. We do hosting and managed hosting, and we provide support and maintenance for Islandora, Fedora, and all of the suite of services that sort of orbit around that. I will show a slide later that has a list of those, and we'll talk about that a little bit. I've included a few links here, and earlier today I threw in a couple more institutions that weren't on the list. I'll dig up links and share those with Aaron. But the slides in the that are linked in the schedule today have links in them, and you can click through to Providence Public Library or the Folger Shakespeare Library or Revolutionary City. All of those are running Fedora 6 under the hood. The Five College Compass one I included because it does not use Fedora. And if you click around, you will hardly be able to tell the difference. So what is Islandora? Islandora is, most importantly, a Drupal-based digital asset management system. And just like Fedora, it is flexible and open source and extensible. And here's where I'm editorializing a little bit. I would say that it is more standards aligned than standards based. Most institutions that use Islandora are looking for both a content management system and a search and discovery system, and many, but not all, have preservation goals. So Fedora is actually optional in the Islandora ecosystem. In the previous version of Islandora, which is confusingly and irritatingly named Islandora 7, um, Fedora was mandatory. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to systems diagram. I believe Amy Blau is giving a much more in-depth tour in maybe an hour or so. So I'm just going to click through this. If you haven't clicked through an Islandora site, the Whitman College Arminda collections are a terrific, straightforward example. There's a homepage with featured collections. You can search right from the homepage into a global search. You can also see that collection pull down there in the in that hero graphic. And as I click into an object, you can see that there's pretty much a sort of standard digital repository user experience here. There is a ubiquitous search bar. There is navigational items like the breadcrumbs. There's an object viewer, and then there's metadata display below. That download button you can see on the right-hand side will let you have access to download whatever of the binaries associated with this object the institution has opted in to allow download it. And Islandora can handle all sorts of content. I anticipate that Amy will show off quite a bit of what Arminda does. But here on the left is a PDF with search inside the object. On the right is some sort of a student thesis, I think. On the left here is what used to be a uniquely Islandora construct, a compound object. These are two objects with a parent record, and the parent record has its own metadata. So at the bottom there, you can see both item description and set description. That lets you toggle between the two. But this is a very simple oral histories object. There's an audio file, and then there's a transcript. And on the right is a video. And what Islandora really does for you, and it's Drupal, not Islandora, that's doing this, is it provides a content management interface for the metadata and for the binaries that ultimately could get deposited into Fedora. So this is a single object that I've just clicked edit on in the repository. It's actually the video object that was on the right in the previous slide. And then one of the great tools for Islandora 2.0 is an Islandora. It's called Islandora Workbench. Mark Jordan from Simon Fraser created it as a bulk ingest, bulk update tool. It is still just a command line tool. It's actually a set of Python scripts that are really easy to customize and configure for your own use. But we've used it to ingest millions of records into Islandora and Fedora. So here's the systems diagram. And this is the one with Fedora, and I'll show you without Fedora in a second. It's really a very similar system. So what is Islandora? Islandora is primarily a Drupal content management system. And what that means is a PHP web interface that stores its data in a MySQL database. Islandora makes it really easy to also run Matomo, which is an open source Google Analytics alternative. Islandora bundles in Cantaloupe, which is a IIIF compliant image server, and then Solr powers the search index. We use a thing called Trafic as a proxy. There are lots of ways to handle SSL and to do load balancing and so on. But the way we do this is with Docker, and this Isle project is a sort of a sidecar to the Islandora project that gives you all the containers you need to run all of these things. So every little box in here is a different container that runs on your server, and they're all made available through this Isle project. So that sort of brings me to all these things over here on the right. So these are what we call the microservices: Houdini, Hypercube, Homerus, and Fits. And these are what they really do is when you put something into Drupal, they generate derivatives, right? So you upload maybe just your primary object, a big TIFF, for example, for an image, and it will extract the OCR. It will make a service file and a thumbnail and so on, and extract the Fits technical metadata. And one of the other things that it does is that it takes the binaries and the metadata, and it passes them through a service called Milner, and that deposits them in Fedora. So I'll come back to this in a second, but let's look at what happens if you don't have Fedora in the mix. Really, everything is the same, except you're writing objects directly to disk. Right? So you can see that Fedora's place in the Islandora ecosystem right now is as a preservation backend. If you value what Fedora provides, it is something that that gives you extra sort of preservation features. But it also requires a little more complexity and a little more expertise to run this whole ecosystem, especially for institutions that know Drupal pretty well. Running a bunch of extra pretty large Java apps is sometimes intimidating. So where is Islandora? And what's next for Islandora? We just completed a round of strategic planning, and what we've determined is that the Islandora Foundation needs employees again. So I was watching with interest earlier at the sort of governance and staffing models presented for Fedora, and we are also taking a look at Samvera's analogous structures, and we're looking at what is the best way to set up a similar configuration. You'll remember that Islandora used to have a community manager and a lead developer, and now it has neither, really just relies on volunteer efforts through the various committees of the foundation. But what we've determined is that there is enough membership to support full-time staff, and really the community would be far better served with a dedicated community manager first and then lead developer second. One of the other key things, though, I alluded to a minute ago, which is we need to prioritize the ease of adoption. And what that means is Fedora looks like it actually will become really an optional, or like an opt-in component of the Islandora stack, um, which at first glance maybe makes you think that the Fedora and Islandora communities might grow further apart, but I don't believe that. I actually think that we have an opportunity within the Drupal ecosystem by allowing institutions to pick up this ecosystem and run it just on top of the normal Drupal infrastructure that they run without all of these extra items. You know, you can just rely on ImageMagick running on your Drupal server. You don't need microservices to generate derivatives necessarily. And the same is true for image styles in Drupal instead of running it through a Cantaloupe server. But the sort of fulsome Islandora ecosystem would include the option to add on all of those components. We just need to make it so that Drupal community members can come in, pop in the Islandora module into a site that they're building, and kick the tires without doing an enormous amount of infrastructure overhead. So I anticipate there will be a Fedora submodule for Islandora, and when you enable that, then you have to hook into a Fedora backend, either that you're running or that perhaps a vendor is running as a service in the cloud. So coming out of those conversations in the strategic plan, there is definitely a strong desire to keep the Islandora and Fedora communities tightly entwined. And as Aaron mentioned earlier, there really is a need to have some permanent linkage between these communities. So we're delighted on the Islandora side to welcome Nicole to the Islandora Board of Directors, and both she and I will be working to ensure that there is a really good connection and that there is a smooth uh, interface for opting into Fedora within Islandora, so that hopefully both communities grow as a result of accessing the wider Drupal community. I'm happy to take a few questions now, if anybody has them.
Thank you, Noah. Any questions? We can take them live or in the Q&A. We are also very excited to have Nicole Scalessa sit on the Fedora governance board as well. So that's excellent. And we're also excited to have you here presenting today too.
Terrific. Well, Nicole and I are in both Slacks, so you should feel free to approach either of us. And there's a number of governance things that are moving all at once here on the Islandora side, especially with hiring staff. That's not a quick thing. So bear with us, and we promise we'll be back around to engage, even if you all don't reach out to us.
Awesome.
Anything you want to add, Nicole?
Nothing I can think of. That was wonderful. Thank you, Noah.
Great. All right. Well, thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, thank you.